Please welcome to the stage, Ron Howard. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know you were at the games yesterday.
I was at the games.
So, yeah, so thank you for making the time after that party. We were discussing just a few minutes ago, you have a very unique career in Hollywood, perhaps more unique than a lot of people. And you've been an actor, director, producer. You've done a lot of things, and you've seen a little bit of a arc of film evolve over time. So maybe I want to start with something perhaps a bit general, which is how do you see really, like, as you progress in your career, the role of technology plays in it all?
Well, I mean, by the way, your talk was excellent. Your speech, the spirit of it is so right. And so accurate. It speaks to the moment, but it also speaks to all time. And stories have always been significant, and technology has always influenced them, whether it's the development of stagecraft illusions and all of that. That's why George Lucas always called it ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. Because you are creating something to share, an idea to share, to transport people. And for me personally, I've seen a lot of transformations. When I literally first started acting as a kid, I was doing actually the last of the live dramas, which was Playhouse 90, when I was 5 years old, and and there was still kinescope instead of using videotape to record TV shows, and even The Music Man was something called. It was made on this giant camera called Technorama. There was Cinerama. It was like an 8-perf system, but it was a giant box. It was like a real throwback to try to get this high resolution film. Then there was the next big step really was the Panavision camera. The fact that you could have a handheld camera that could record sound reliably. That changed everything. Suddenly people were leaving studios and going out into the world. It goes on and on. I was involved with George Lucas on so many things, but the first morph shot, it's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records as such, really designed by Dennis Murin and others at ILM, was for Willow. And when we were talking about this magical transformation that we were going to do, I imagined it in a lot of different shots and dissolves and so forth. And they started talking about it as one shot, and he said, I said, well, how will we, how will you shoot it? And he said, well, we won't shoot it. And I said, well, what camera? And he said, well, it won't be a camera. I couldn't figure out what the hell Dennis Murin was talking about, and it turned into morphing. Of course, George led the way with digital filmmaking, huge transformation. And I'm going to get to my point here. All of it is simply a process of using cinema, but theater too, theatrics, but especially cinema, to help storytellers share with audiences what it is that's in their mind's eye, what's in their imagination. And that's what George's ambition, was always about. And of course, this is what's happening. It's democratizing it. The technology is very exciting in terms of its potential to again, more efficiently, more broadly, allow storytellers to get their ideas out there to us. And the other point, okay, thank you. Yes, I think it's and there are a lot of factors. There's, on a professional level, legal issues, best practices. There are so many factors that yet to be sorted out. But the technology is what it is, and it offers what it offers, which it needs to be sorted out, and because it, we will want it. Ultimately, what's it going to yield? A new aesthetic. It's going to borrow from cinema, as we saw the films that were running here. It's sort of inspired by what we recognize today as what cinema looks like. That makes sense. But it's going to evolve very rapidly, and it's going to be, again, up to the audiences to determine what appeals, what resonates. Well, one thing that came to mind as I just watching some of the films that were playing before your talk and thinking about the breakthroughs and so forth. This is something that I've had in my mind for a while. I mean, there's going to be a version which is just authorship, and instead of a small group of people making a graphic novel or a single author, writing a novel, and there's going to be absolutely handmade storytelling, and it's going to ultimately be determined by us. What's worth our time? What are we invested in? What values do we care about? Do we care about, knowing the live actors on screen and connecting with them for that reason, or which I think won't ever go away? But are we also fully willing to invest in characters that are synthetic? But there are already CGI characters, there are already animated characters. So I think the answer is we don't really know, but I expect there's room for all of it.
Makes sense. By the way, thank you for sharing that perspective. I guess it feels like very nuanced, and you're very good at not only analyzing the moment now, but the moment in regards to how things have changed. Do you think it doesn't feel to me that everyone has gotten to that nuance yet? It feels very polarizing these days.
Well, you're talking about change. That's disturbing. I worry about it to some extent. What does it mean on a professional level? That's why I get back to the need to deal with these, the impact of it legally, and just culturally best practices. Not every country in the world is going to ascribe to the same set of principles around best practices, but that's something that we have to do and talk about. But again, I think, yes, it's all our job to worry about it, think about it, experiment with it, learn from it, and talk to each other and work on it. But it's going to evolve, and audiences are going to tell us. Audiences ultimately are going to tell us.
What do you think is the ultimate mark of knowing that you're making something good, regardless of how you're making it? Is it the format? Is it the story? What do you think really drives something good?
Well, story is always king. Does it transport? Does it evoke emotion? Does it connect with us in whatever way that it's intended to or capable of? And I'm going to jump ahead to one of your questions, where you sort of said, "Well, as a young filmmaker, what would you do?" Well, you use the tools available, and you start making stuff. But what you really do is show it to people, and get their reaction. And you begin to see that place, that zone where your sensibilities, or the sensibilities of you and a group of collaborators. I really, really believe in teams. Even yes, there's an auteur theory, and there are some auteurs, but most great undertakings involve a number of people pulling in the same direction. And I think that when you share your work, that's when you learn. And you need to work. It's best when you can work on things that you love and care about. Most likely, you're going to get the best response when you do that. But I think storytelling is about a kind of a communication, and just like that story that you tell about where you went over the summer. The first time you tell it, it's kind of rambling and awkward, and it doesn't mean much. By the 10th time you tell it, people really wish they went on that vacation with you because it was really just great.
So in a way, I guess that's an interesting point, because in some ways it's about making more. You're able to make more, and technology, I think, it's always about making things that are very hard and accessible to more. So not only more people can do it, but also you can do it faster and better, and you can do more of that, right?
Well, we were talking about this earlier. There's the professional side of cinema, that again is an industry, and needs to understand what this means in terms of impact on jobs and so forth. And when we talk about AI, everybody puts it all in one umbrella. This is what you're talking about, the lack of nuances. When in fact, a lot of what it offers professional cinema is really just a kind of it's machine learning at a heightened level, and it's an extension of what we've been doing for a long time now, especially with digital technology, which my friend George Lucas really pioneered. And but then there are people like these folks who, you know, they're not a part of an industry per se. You know, maybe they can monetize their work, that'd be great. But in the meantime, they actually don't have to worry about those things. They can explore their creativity as freely and openly as possible and help define the future by the experimenters, you know, on the vanguard.
Did you find yourself doing versions of that early in your career where you're experimenting and not really knowing where you're going, but like trying to find exactly like a point?
Because I began so young, and even as a director, all my experiments have always been under the bright lights of you know, a series of investors, distribution system, and critics. So you know, here and there. Certainly beginning as a kid, you know, in the Super 8 days, sure, learning your way, but you know, never as freely. And by the way, I'm not particularly tech savvy. I like to be in that sort of first wave of those who can apply the tech. You know, when we shifted over from film to the Avid, for me, it suited my temperament beautifully because it was faster. You could experiment. It was more dynamic in those ways, and I loved it. But I was pretty slow, myself and my editors, to actually, you know, beginning to use something like the Avid. So you know, I'm not going to be that person who's pouring hours into understanding it. But when I start to see it work and help tell a story, and liberate my own sort of imagination as to what's possible, I get very excited about it.
What about like you know, scales and budget? Because I feel like these days in Hollywood there's discussion about like, you know, you need like a lot of money to just be able to make something in the first place, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I think part of it is the system itself, but also technology now has gotten to a place where you don't have to, right?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, again, application. You know, I would have thought that digital filmmaking would lower costs a lot more than it ultimately did.
It did in some ways, right?
In some ways,
yeah.
Yes, but in other, because you know why? Audience expectations for what a movie should look like and sound like also rise. And to meet those expectations, you know, can be very, very demanding and sometimes expensive. One would think this technology is you know, given, you know, the efficiencies it can offer the traditional system that we follow, and also the sort of the new breakthroughs in just not just image generation, but also just making things more cohesive more quickly, being able to fix errors more quickly. You know, it would seem it's going to create a lot of efficiencies. But you know, so far I can't say that I've seen it yet in my world.
It's happening slowly. I guess one other thing that comes to mind is, you know, a lot of people are trying to get into this, and they're like still trying to figure out exactly where they want to go. If maybe you were kind of getting into this before, but if you had to say something like a huge piece of advice to someone who's starting to build their careers, not only around the old like existing technologies, but about new technologies, what is something perhaps they should make sure they get right?
Well, as far as careers going, you know, I mean, I would say, I mean, that's a next level, and that's about expertise, and so you need to do whatever your sort of area of interest is. I think more and more, my daughter Bryce taught a class at NYU about hyphenates, creative hyphenates. I do think people need to be able to be sort of expert at more than one thing, in order to help build a career, like even as a director or a writer, I don't think you can be sort of just great at one genre. I think you have to be able to say, or format. Oh, I could do a series, or I could do a TV commercial, or I could do a movie, or maybe a documentary. I understand how to apply what I do to all these areas. I think that that's kind of important. But the thing that I would say is, I mean, look, when my grandkids come over and hang out at the house, it's a very creative family in general, but those kids they're taking their iPhone and they're making a movie. And instead of what kids used to do is, hey, let's put on a show and gather all the grown-ups and do it, at 5 o'clock after dinner. Now, we all gather at the end of the day and watch the often hilarious, sometimes shockingly horrific 3-minute movie that the grandkids made, that on the iPhone, that's got sound effects and it's got music and it's got blood somehow. I don't know how they did that, but but they're learning the language of cinema, and they're finding their voices within it, and finding a lot of joy in that process. But I think that's it, is take the tools that are so accessible now and be making stuff. You saw for a quick moment there, I had the real honor of doing a documentary about Jim Henson a couple of years ago. And one of the things that he said was that he was a lifelong maker. And he had his ups and downs, critics like this. Some things were commercial, some weren't. But whether it was the weekend and it was a little puppet or a drawing or something he was doing, or a Muppet movie, or Labyrinth or something. He just wanted to be busy making. Well, that's what these tools are making so accessible and so exciting.
Just experiment and be busy making as much as you can.
In my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, what better time now than doing this? Ron, thank you so much for spending time with us and for sharing some of your wisdom.
Enjoy.
Please.
Enjoy what you do.
Give it applause for Ron. Appreciate it.